let's get started off the bat here. So we're talking about social movements. Social movements are groups of individuals or organizations, some large and some small, with the goal to create social and political change in the world. The movement may target certain laws or social issues and can start change from the bottom within nations. These movements can be done in two ways, one being peaceful and the other violent. Throughout our nation, there have been social movements, including civil rights movements in the United States, environmental movements, green movement, gay rights, labor, anti-globalization, vegetarian, feminist. Some reasons for social movements are to gain rights and freedoms, resist current regime, change social and political laws, and equality. The examples I'm going to talk about for the assignment are the March on Washington, the Salt March, and the Singing Revolution. The March on Washington was a protest for equality amongst African Americans. The march was a peaceful protest that exhibited civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is the refusal to obey certain laws and demands that come from the government. These are associated with peaceful movements because they're known for nonviolence. It's known for having more than 200,000 supporters coming out to listen to Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech during the march. Many people were called racist terms and physically beaten, and so this march was to protect, to try to step forward in protesting against the people who were for racism. It makes many of the oppressors and people living under the social regime feel empathy towards the cause when they do civil disobedience, just because they're not fighting back. So it makes them look worse and hopefully see the picture that racism isn't the right thing. The same can be said about the Salt March. When Britain was in control of India, many Indians weren't allowed to collect or sell salt because it was the law, and Gandhi had put together a large group of Indians to march and protest with collecting salt. It was a non-violent way of protesting. Many Indians were arrested and put in jail for this, but in the end, India had gained sovereignty because of their civil disobedience. And the last example is the Singing Revolution. It was a social movement to gain independence from the Soviet Union for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The protesters sang songs of national pride in the streets, which had been outlawed by the Soviets. And after the deaths of 14 protesters, over time they all gained their freedom, and I thought that was really interesting. Oh, hey kitty, get out! Yeah. So anyway, sorry, cat. The three, now I'm going to talk about three that were violent. One being the Greensboro 1976 KKK protest, which after anti-racist organizers started a march against the Ku Klux Klan, guns were fired by white supremacists, killing 5 marchers. And number 2 was the Soweto uprising. In 1976, several African students in the South African township of Soweto organized a protest to protest recent laws forcing them to learn the language of their white Dutch oppressors. During the protest, 20,000 students marched and 176 were killed by South African police. The Tottenham protest, which was actually more current, 2011, several people in the Tottenham area of London organized a protest march over the killing of an unarmed man named Mark Dugan. The march finished at the Tottenham police station, where organizers demanded to speak to senior police officials, and and 16 or after police officials refused to meet with protesters and a 16-year-old girl was attacked, riots broke out that would eventually spread across all of England and crippled the country for weeks. And now, like, for differences, similarities, and protests, well, many, certain protests many people have died for, and or the oppressors, have been killed because of protesters, whether it's violent or not. More often, violent protesters were more ineffective as the non-violent ones, and perfect examples were the Gandhi and um, the the Salt March and the March on Washington. And I think it's very interesting how these movements, how the peaceful movements, which practice civil disobedience, are ended up being more effective, and radical movements are. I forgot to say this earlier, but radical movements are they're like social movements that want to change the entire regime and make it eat like completely eliminate. What?